Somewhere in America right now, there is a neighborhood where everyone is safe and everyone is a stranger and everyone is a neighbor, and someone on that street is not what they appear to be. They go to the block parties. They wave from the driveway. They know the children's names. They use those names with warmth, with familiarity, with a comfort that everyone around them takes as a sign of belonging. Nobody thinks to ask why they remember so much. On the 14th of July 2016, 9-year-old Marcus Joel Reed left his family's home at 3 p.m. to ride his bicycle to a friend's house 6 streets away. He never arrived. By 4:40 p.m., his mother Cheryl Reed had called the friend, called Marcus's phone. No answer, and called the Carver's Bluff Police Department. By 6 p.m., the neighborhood had mobilized. Search teams had formed. Flyers were being printed. A WhatsApp group with 62 members had been created and was already pinging with information, directions, updates. Among the first people to show up on the Reed family's doorstep was a man named Derek Alton. He brought water. He brought a box of granola bars. He told Cheryl Reed, standing in her own doorway, her hands shaking, that they would find Marcus. He said it with absolute certainty. He put a hand on her shoulder. He told her he was going to do everything he possibly could. He was. Just not in the way anyone understood yet. Carver's Bluff sits in Fulton County, Georgia, 23 miles southeast of Atlanta, close enough to commute, far enough to feel removed from the city's pace. Population, roughly 14,000. The kind of community that has a strong neighborhood association, a well-attended little league, and a July 4th block party that has been running continuously since 1991. Marcus Reed had lived on Birchwood Court his entire life. His parents, Cheryl and Anthony Reed, had moved there when Cheryl was 6 weeks pregnant. Anthony worked in logistics management. Cheryl was an ER nurse who did 3 12-hour shifts a week and spent the rest of her time being, by every account that would later be gathered, an exceptional mother. Marcus Reed was 9 years old in the summer of 2016. He was entering 4th grade in September. He played baseball, outfield, fast, reliable hands, and had a particular passion for building things. Lego model kits, anything that came in pieces and required assembly. His bedroom had 4 complete model aircraft hanging from the ceiling, each one built entirely without adult help. He had started the 5th. His teacher from 3rd grade, a woman named Rita Hollins, described him in a later interview as one of those children who makes you glad you became a teacher. She said he was curious about everything. She said he asked questions that made her think. She said he remembered every answer she gave him and came back the next day with a follow-up question. He was tall for 9. He had a gap in his front teeth that his parents kept meaning to get looked at. He still slept with a stuffed dog named Beans that he had owned since he was 18 months old but would deny having to any friend who came over. His mother knew. She left it on his pillow every morning while he was at school. The street, Birchwood Court, had 11 houses. Most of the families had children. The neighborhood association had a texting tree for weather warnings, power outages, and lost pets. People looked out for each other's properties when someone was away. Keys were exchanged. This was, in every visible respect, the kind of close-knit community that crime statistics suggest is the safest possible environment for a child to grow up in. It is a particular cruelty of cases like Marcus Reed's that this closeness, this trust, this familiarity, is precisely what made him vulnerable. Because on Birchwood Court, an adult who called your child by name and offered lemonade on a hot day was not a stranger to be wary of. On Birchwood Court, that adult was a neighbor. That adult was known. That adult was safe. Derek Alton. Derek Paul Alton had lived at number 7 Birchwood Court for 9 years, almost exactly as long as the Reed family had been at number 19. He was 44 years old. He worked from home as a freelance CAD draftsman for construction firms. He was divorced, had been for 7 years. He had no children of his own. He was, by every description gathered from neighbors in the days after Marcus's disappearance, quiet, friendly enough, kept his yard immaculate, had a pool that the neighborhood kids used regularly in summer, with his explicit and enthusiastic invitation. That last detail, the pool, the standing invitation, the easy access to children on hot days, was one that investigators would return to repeatedly. Not because anyone had ever raised a specific concern about Derek Alton and children. Nobody had. He had never come to anyone's attention. He had never been the subject of a complaint. He had no prior record. He was in the files of every law enforcement database that existed in July 2016, an invisible man. July 14, 2016 was a Thursday. It was 94 degrees Fahrenheit in Carver's Bluff. Cheryl Reed was working a 12-hour shift at the hospital. Anthony Reed was at a logistics conference in Charlotte and was due home Friday night. Marcus had stayed overnight at a friend's house 2 streets away and had come home after lunch, around 1:30 p.m. The house was quiet. The babysitter, a 16-year-old girl named Jessie Park from the street behind, was there until Cheryl got home. At 3 p.m., Marcus asked Jessie if he could ride to his friend Damien's house on Lakeview Street. Jessie said yes. She watched him cycle down the driveway, turn left, and disappear around the bend at the end of Birchwood Court. That was the last time anyone in his family would see Marcus Reed alive. What the route looked like. The journey from the Reed home to Damien Okafor's house on Lakeview Street was 6 streets, approximately 800 meters. There were 2 routes. The direct route, which took Marcus past 3 intersections and along a main residential road, and the cut-through, which went through the side streets and past, among other houses, number 7 Birchwood Court. Investigators would later establish, through CCTV from a neighbor's Ring doorbell camera and from another camera mounted on a garden shed 3 houses down, that Marcus had taken the cut-through. The cameras captured him cycling at normal pace at 3:06 p.m., passing number 11 Birchwood Court. After that, nothing. No further camera capture. No sighting. As if the street simply swallowed him. The gap in camera coverage was 6 houses. Numbers 11 through 19 on one side and 6 through 10 on the other. Number 7, Derek Alton's house, sat squarely in the middle of that blind spot. 4:40 p.m., the call. Marcus was due at Damien's house by 3:30 at the latest. At 4:15, Damien's mother, Ruth Okafor, called the Reed home to ask if Marcus was still coming. Jessie Park tried Marcus's mobile. No answer. She tried again at 4:25. No answer. At 4:40 p.m., she called Cheryl Reed at the hospital. Cheryl Reed left her shift immediately. She was back on Birchwood Court at 5:18 p.m. She had been calling Marcus every 5 minutes for the entire drive. His phone went straight to voicemail after the second call. Either the battery had died or the phone was off. Or the phone was gone. Cheryl's first call before she even parked the car was to 911. Her second call, 90 seconds later, was to Derek Alton. She called him because he was nearby. Because he had a pool and she thought, desperately, irrationally, the way a parent thinks when they're running on adrenaline and terror, that maybe Marcus had stopped by. Maybe he was there. Maybe he was fine. Derek Alton answered on the second ring. He said he hadn't seen Marcus but he was coming right over. He said to call him if she needed anything. He said he was already putting his shoes on. He arrived at the Reed home within 4 minutes of Cheryl's call. He was the first neighbor there. He was there before the police. The search for Marcus Reed began within 2 hours of Cheryl's 911 call and became one of the largest community-organized missing child searches in Fulton County history. By the first morning, Friday the 15th, over 300 volunteers had registered with the coordination center set up in the car park of the Carver's Bluff Community Center. Anthony Reed drove through the night from Charlotte, arriving home at 3:30 a.m. on Friday. He arrived at a house full of neighbors, detectives, and empty coffee cups. He arrived to find Derek Alton still there, sitting at the kitchen table with Cheryl, going over the search grid map for the morning. The volunteer. Over the 6 days of the search, Derek Alton was present at almost every significant event. He was there for the first organized search on Friday morning. He printed and distributed 400 flyers. He produced them from his home printer, offering the use of his toner cartridge, his paper, his time. He attended every nightly briefing at the community center. He was at the vigil on Sunday evening, standing beside the Reeds, one hand on Anthony's shoulder when the pastor led the prayer. He was interviewed 3 times on local news, twice as a concerned neighbor and once specifically as a man who had known Marcus well. In that third interview, he described Marcus as an amazing kid. He said he used to let Marcus help him with yard work sometimes and pay him a few dollars because the boy liked to feel useful. He said he couldn't imagine who could do something like this. He said it standing in front of his own house. The camera was on his face. He did not look away. The investigation running underneath. While the community searched, investigators were conducting a parallel investigation that was far less visible. Led by Detective Lieutenant James Obey and Detective Sergeant Paula Wren, the Carver's Bluff PD had, within 24 hours of Marcus's disappearance, begun the systematic work that missing child cases demand, canvassing every residence on Marcus's route, obtaining every available CCTV and doorbell camera footage within a half-mile radius, and building a timeline of the afternoon minute by minute. The camera dead zone on Birchwood Court emerged on day 1. It was noted. It was not yet the focus. There were other leads to pursue, other possibilities to eliminate. A neighborhood has many people in it, and in the early stages of an investigation into a missing child, every lead gets equal weight. But on day 2, Saturday, July 16th, Detective Wren made a note in her case file. It was a brief note for lines that would become significant. She had spoken, as part of routine canvassing, to 6 neighbors on Birchwood Court. 5 had provided their whereabouts for Thursday afternoon without hesitation. The 6th, Derek Paul Alton, number 7, had been cooperative and warm and had mentioned, unprompted, that he had been in his home office working all afternoon and had not seen Marcus pass by. Detective Wren's note read, "Subject volunteered alibi before alibi was requested." Watch. Paula Wren had been a detective for 14 years. She had learned, through 1,000 interviews, 100 suspects and 2 prior homicide cases, that innocent people do not typically lead with their alibi. They answer the question asked. They don't preempt the question that's coming. They don't already know the question that's coming. She flagged Derek Alton. Quietly. Without alarming the community search operation. Without letting him know. The vigil for Marcus Reed was held on Sunday evening, July 17th, 3 days after his disappearance. It was attended by over 500 people. Local news crews were there. The mayor of Carver's Bluff was there. Cheryl and Anthony Reed stood at the front, Cheryl gripping a framed photograph of her son, Anthony with his arm around her in the particular posture of a man trying to hold a collapsing world together. Derek Alton stood 2 feet to Anthony's left. He held a candle. He sang the hymn. He was photographed by multiple news outlets. Those photographs would later appear in every major piece of coverage about the case, reproduced not as evidence of his grief but as evidence of something far darker. The monster among the mourners. A variable. On the morning of day 4, Monday, July 18th, a variable entered the investigation that Detective Wren had not anticipated. A 15-year-old boy named Calvin Briggs, who lived on the street behind Birchwood Court, came to the community center with his mother. He had something to tell police. He had been sitting on it for 4 days because, as he explained to Detective Wren, he wasn't sure it meant anything. His mother had told him to say it anyway. Calvin Briggs said that on Thursday afternoon around 3:15 p.m., he had been in his backyard, which backed onto the fence line of number 7 Birchwood Court. He had been there for about half an hour, doing nothing in particular, and he had heard voices from behind Derek Alton's fence. 2 voices, an adult male he recognized as Mr. Alton and a child. The child had called the adult by name. He had said, "Mr. Derek." Calvin had not heard the conversation clearly, but he had heard one thing. He had heard the child laugh. A laugh he recognized. A distinctive, slightly high-pitched laugh that, Calvin told Detective Wren haltingly with his mother's hand on his arm, sounded exactly like Marcus. The decision. Calvin Briggs's testimony changed the investigation's center of gravity entirely. From that Monday morning, Derek Alton was no longer one of many people of interest on a list. He was the focus. Everything else became secondary. Investigators had to make a critical decision immediately. Move on Alton now or build the case first. Move too early without enough evidence and risk alerting him, risk a lawyer shutting everything down, risk him having time to destroy whatever evidence remained. Wait too long and risk losing evidence, or, in the worst case, risk Marcus's body being moved. They chose to move quickly but carefully. A surveillance package on number 7 was in place within 6 hours. A warrant application was drafted, and an undercover officer, posing as a new volunteer coordinator, was inserted into the community search team to observe Derek Alton directly. The undercover officer spent 2 days near Derek Alton at the search operation. Her report noted 2 things that she described as significant. First, Derek Alton never searched the street behind the community center, the sector adjacent to his own property. He always took assignments that pointed away from his home. Second, on one occasion when the search team's route brought them within 2 blocks of number 7, Derek had abruptly felt unwell and returned to the coordination center. He did not want anyone searching near his property, and he had the perfect cover for making sure they didn't. On July 20, 2016, 6 days after Marcus Reed's disappearance and 2 days after Calvin Briggs came forward, the Fulton County District Court granted a search warrant for 7 Birchwood Court, Derek Paul Alton's home and property. The warrant was executed at 5:55 a.m. Derek Alton was inside. He opened the door in response to knocking and was immediately detained. He was, by all accounts, completely alert, as if he had been awake and expecting it. He said nothing beyond asking what this was about. He was calm in a way that, to the officers present, immediately communicated that this was not a man being woken by surprise. He was taken to Carver's Bluff PD for questioning while the search of his property began. What the search found. The forensic search of 7 Birchwood Court took 11 hours. It was conducted by a Fulton County CSI team working under the supervision of a Georgia Bureau of Investigation forensic specialist named Dr. Ava Chin. What Dr. Chin's team found in that 11 hours built a case that the prosecution would later describe as among the most forensically coherent in Fulton County's recent history. First, in the garage on a workbench, a child's bicycle. Red frame, white handlebars, a small dent on the front fender from a previous incident Marcus's parents had described to investigators. A sticker on the crossbar, a small Atlanta Braves logo given to Marcus by his grandfather. Marcus's bicycle. Second, in the pool house adjacent to the backyard swimming pool, blood traces, later DNA confirmed as Marcus Reed's, on the concrete floor and on the lower edge of the pool house door. Third, in the pool itself, luminol testing performed after the water was partially drained revealed additional blood traces on the pool wall and on the interior steps. The pool had been cleaned, within a very recent time frame, judging by chemical residue levels. It had not been cleaned well enough. Fourth, on Alton's home computer, accessed under the warrant, a search history that predated Marcus's disappearance by 4 months. The searches were systematic and specific. They concerned, among other things, body disposal methods, the degradation of DNA in water, reported detection capabilities of forensic luminol tests, and the geography of undeveloped land within a 20-mile radius of Carver's Bluff. He had been researching. He had been planning. Marcus Reed was not an impulsive act. He was a calculation. Derek Alton had been planning for months. The neighborhood, the invitation, the pull, the trust. All of it constructed, not as a life, but as infrastructure for a crime that he had already, in his own mind, decided to commit. Marcus Reed's body was discovered on the morning of July 21st, 7 days after he disappeared. He was found in a drainage culvert in a stretch of undeveloped land 4.2 miles southeast of Carver's Bluff, an area that appeared in Derek Alton's search history. He had been concealed with brush and debris. He had been there since the afternoon of July 14th. The Fulton County Medical Examiner confirmed that Marcus had died on July 14th. He was 9 years old. He had been murdered within hours of Calvin Briggs hearing him laugh on the other side of a wooden fence. He had been alive in that backyard while his mother was already calling his name. Derek Paul Alton was interviewed by Detective Lieutenant James Obey and Detective Sergeant Paula Wren at the Carver's Bluff PD over 2 sessions spanning most of July 20th. He had been informed of his rights. He had been offered an attorney. He declined an attorney for the first session. That decision, to speak without counsel in the first session, was either profound arrogance or a calculated assessment that he could still contain the situation. Given what the search of his property was simultaneously uncovering, it was, retrospectively, the single worst decision Derek Alton made. Session 1. In the first session, Alton maintained his story. He had been in his home office all Thursday afternoon. He had not seen Marcus. He had no idea what had happened. He was as devastated as everyone else. He wanted to help however he could. Detective Obi let him talk. Obi was experienced enough to know that a suspect who wants to fill silence will eventually fill it with something they shouldn't. He asked open questions. He expressed sympathy. He said he knew how much Derek cared about the family. He said the community was lucky to have people like Derek. Alton responded to this. He relaxed fractionally. He spoke at length about his relationship with Marcus, his relationship with the Reeds, his commitment to the search. He was, in this session, very close to the man the cameras had seen at the vigil. Composed, articulate, human. Session 2, after the bicycle. The second session began 3 hours later. Between sessions, Detective Obi had received the call from the search team. Marcus's bicycle had been found in the garage of number 7. He returned to the interview room with that information and placed a photograph of the bicycle on the table in front of Derek Alton. Alton looked at the photograph for a long time. His expression, Obi later said, didn't shift in a way most people would recognize. It was subtler, a very slight compression around the eyes. A micro pause before he spoke, barely perceptible but completely consistent across multiple replays of the interview footage. He said he didn't know how the bicycle had got there. He said it must have been there before. He said maybe Marcus had left it there on a previous visit. Detective Wren, who had been quiet for most of the session, spoke for the first time. She asked Derek, calmly, when Marcus had last visited his property. He said a few weeks ago. She asked if that was before or after the pool cleaning. He said he didn't know what she meant. She put a second photograph on the table. The luminol results from the pool house floor. The pause that followed lasted 11 seconds. Investigators timed it from the recording. 11 seconds of Derek Alton looking at a photograph of blood evidence in his own pool house. Then he asked for a lawyer. In the weeks following Derek Alton's arrest, the forensic investigation of his digital life produced a picture that was, in the words of the prosecution's lead investigator, not the picture of a man who had acted once in a moment of darkness. It was the picture of a man who had sustained and organized a pattern of thinking and behavior over a significant period of time. This element of the case, presented carefully and with full legal compliance at trial, added a dimension to Derek Alton that transformed public understanding of what had happened on Birchwood Court. Because Marcus Reed, investigators now believed, had not been a spontaneous decision. He had been stalked, within his own neighborhood, by a man who knew exactly how much access trust could give him. The digital record. The forensic analysis of Alton's devices, conducted by GBI specialists over 6 weeks, recovered a substantial record. Among the material found, photographs taken covertly of neighborhood children in outdoor settings, including the Reed's backyard, taken from an elevated angle consistent with an upstairs window at number 7. These photographs predated Marcus's death by at least 18 months. None were of an overtly sexual nature, but their systematic covert collection was, investigators concluded, deeply indicative of sustained targeting. Cloud storage accounts linked to Alton's email, not immediately apparent from his primary devices, were identified and obtained under warrant. These accounts contained a larger volume of similar material, organized into folders, some of which carried file names that were themselves evidence of intent. Marcus appeared in this material repeatedly. From different angles, different distances, different dates. A systematic accumulation of surveillance of a specific child by a man the child trusted completely. What it meant for the case. The digital evidence transformed the prosecution's case from a single-incident homicide into a premeditated, targeted, planned crime. ADA Renee Carter, the Fulton County prosecutor assigned to the case, told the court in her opening statement that the evidence would show that Derek Alton had selected Marcus Reed deliberately, over time, with calculation and patience, and that the murder of July 14th was the endpoint of a process that had begun at least 18 months earlier. The defense, led by Atlanta attorney Marcus Webb, challenged the digital evidence on chain of custody grounds, a challenge that was denied after a 2-day evidentiary hearing. They challenged the admissibility of the covertly taken photographs, denied. They sought to suppress the search history, denied. By the time the jury was seated, Derek Alton's lawyers had lost every pretrial motion they filed. The trial of Derek Paul Alton began on March 13, 2017, 9 months after Marcus Reed's death. He was charged with murder in the first degree, aggravated child molestation, and evidence tampering. He entered a plea of not guilty on all counts. The trial lasted 3 weeks and was attended every day by Cheryl and Anthony Reed. They sat behind the prosecution table. They were there for every piece of evidence. They were there when the bicycle photograph was displayed to the jury. They were there when the luminol results were projected on the courtroom screen. They were there for every day of it. They did not look away from Derek Alton once. The prosecution. ADA Renee Carter built the prosecution's case over 9 trial days. She led with the physical evidence, Marcus's bicycle, the blood traces, the DNA confirmation, before moving to the digital forensics and then to witness testimony. Calvin Briggs testified. He was 16 by the time of the trial, and he was visibly terrified on the stand, but he was clear. The laugh he had heard on the afternoon of July 14th from the other side of Derek Alton's fence was Marcus Reed's laugh. Detective Wren testified for a full day. She walked the jury through the investigation's timeline, the note she had made on day 2, the camera dead zone, the undercover officer's observations, the search warrant, the moment the bicycle was found. Her testimony was described by observers as methodical and devastating. Dr. Ava Chin testified about the forensic evidence. Her testimony on the pool house blood evidence, the DNA confirmation, and the forensic timing of the cleaning was, in the words of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's court reporter, clinical and unanswerable. The verdict: Derek Paul Alton did not testify in his own defense. His attorney Marcus Webb gave a closing argument that challenged the reliability of Calvin Briggs's identification and the interpretation of the digital evidence. It lasted 2.5 hours. The jury deliberated for 9 hours across 2 days. On April 3, 2017, the jury returned. Guilty. Murder in the first degree. Guilty. Aggravated child molestation. Guilty. Evidence tampering. 3 counts. 3 verdicts. All guilty. Derek Alton showed no reaction. He sat perfectly still, the same stillness that had sustained him for 6 days on Birchwood Court while he printed flyers and attended vigils and held Anthony Reed's shoulder and looked into news cameras with an expression of concern so exact, so dialed, so completely convincing, that it had fooled everyone in the room. It did not fool 12 people who had spent 3 weeks looking at the evidence. Derek Paul Alton was sentenced on May 22, 2017. He received life without the possibility of parole, plus consecutive terms on the molestation and tampering charges. He is currently held at Georgia State Prison in Reidsville. He will never leave. He said nothing at sentencing. He had said nothing after his lawyers failed pretrial motions. He had said nothing when the verdict was returned. Derek Alton had been performing composure for so long that by the time the performance had no more purpose, there was apparently nothing left underneath it to say. The people who remained. Cheryl and Anthony Reed gave a joint statement after sentencing. It was 1 paragraph. It said that no verdict and no sentence would bring their son back, that Marcus was the greatest thing that had ever happened to them, and that they were going to spend the rest of their lives making sure his name was remembered. They thanked the investigators. They thanked Calvin Briggs. They thanked every volunteer who had searched for their boy. Then they went home. Detective Lieutenant James Obey retired from Carver's Bluff PD in 2020 after 31 years of service. The Marcus Reed case was his last major homicide investigation. He has declined all media requests since his retirement. His former partner Paula Wren was promoted to lieutenant in 2018. She continues to work major crimes in Fulton County. She has spoken publicly about the case twice. both times to advocate for expanded community education about predatory behavior in trusted adult contexts. Calvin Briggs is in college now. He has, by every account available, carried what he witnessed and what he heard and what he chose, eventually, to do with him every day. His mother, in the one interview she gave, said that her son had not slept properly for a year after the trial. She said he had needed counseling. She said it had helped. She said he was going to be okay. Sandra Kowalski, whose daughter had swum in Derek Alton's pool, moved her family out of Carver's Bluff in 2017. She has said in a single interview that she cannot see a residential swimming pool without her stomach turning over. She said that is a small price to pay for what Marcus's family paid. She said she knows that. She said she thinks about it often. A final note.